Whoa! This is the Illusion reporting from somewhere on Spaceship Earth. I'm at the Talons Out Woodworking Studio making some some smaller picture frames, and I got a request to do a special video from Parker and Christian in second period AP US History, Whitefish, Montana. And they were essentially asking me, isn't history a hoax? Isn't history a hoax? Which I think is a pretty interesting question to be asking from two kids in AP history. I was in AP history. And so what I would tell you is this: history is a hoax on a certain level, because history, as we get it mostly in written narratives, is subjected to A, the agenda of the author, the agenda of the researcher, and also the agenda of publishing houses, educational institutes, and whatnot. But to say that history is a hoax in the sense of it being a valuable commodity to your human existence, I can't go with you there. History is to me one of the most important things you could possibly educate your mind with, next to mathematics, the way I figure it. So, and why is history so important? Because you can't know what this present moment is about till you know what the past is about. Because the interesting thing you find when you begin to look into history, when you begin to read history from all around the planet, is that history repeats itself. Humans are very cyclical. Humans are very predictable with what they will do. So if you don't know what history basically, for all intents and purposes, is a looking glass into the future. If you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, see what happened yesterday, historically speaking. Now, what I'll go with you guys out in Whitefish, Montana, is history a hoax? Somewhat. Because most history we get in the educational system is called Western. What do they call it? Western. It's Western history. It comes from the mindset of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley expanding out into Christendom and then manifest destiny moving west. It wasn't until I got out of public education into higher learning that I began to learn about the Chinese, the Japanese, African cultures. There's where history can be seen as a hoax. But if you don't read your history, how would you know it's a hoax? Because history is all about you finding out what the source of that history is. And that's super important. So when you begin to look at why we're taught history in the United States from a Western Christian manifest destiny perspective, it comes with a political agenda to it. It comes with an agenda to keep you focused on what the goal is of the bigger picture that is dictating our reality at this present moment. But you wouldn't know that unless you were studying history, unless you were studying what was going on with the Egyptians back in the day, what was going on with the Dogon back in the day, what was going on with the Chinese dynasties, what was going on with Genghis Khan, what was going on with Alexander the Great in the same breath. Is history is one of the most valuable things. But if you're just going to read history the same way you watch the History Channel, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. Because history is all about you using your mind. It's all about critical thinking. It's all about researching the information that you're receiving. Because, look, All right. Most people are getting all, I'm just going to bring a present day example because I was just listening to because I listen to history a lot on podcasts and stuff. They were talking about how Bernie Sanders, right, is essentially a socialist. But we're going modern day. Bernie Sanders is essentially a socialist, but most people don't understand that so too was Hitler, the National Socialist Party, right? So what were the Germans up to in the late 1930s? You want to know what's going on in America right now? Go start investigating what was going on in Nazi Germany in 1936 to 1939, man. Some real interesting stuff, which will give you a lens on this reality we're experiencing called modern day America, right? So there's a prime example of why history is so important, because you can't know, you can be fooled, basically. You can be given a bunch of lies about reality, and if you don't know your history, you wouldn't know their lies. And that's what history gives you, is knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And the most important thing you can learn is how to know when you're being deceived, right? Because a lot of what conquering nations do is rewrite the history of the nation they've conquered. You know, we can look at America, for example, the country we live in. We've rewritten the history of the original people that lived here. Absolutely. We've rewritten the history of basically the Western world because of manifest destiny. Do you know what manifest destiny is? Are you fully versed on the realities of what manifest destiny is and what manifest destiny is all about? I mean, okay, so you guys live up in Whitefish, Montana. I mean, how versed are you on Lewis and Clark? Probably a bunch. But do you know about John Jacob Astor and their expedition out to Astoria, Oregon after Lewis and Clark? Because within there, you find out all sorts of interesting history about America. You find out that John Jacob Astor was trying to set up his own nation. Because America was wide open during this time. But you also begin to find out what was going on in New York during the early 1800s. And when you know what's going on in New York during the early 1800s, you see how westward expansion begins to unfold. You see why the Indians are viewed as savages. Because the reason the Indians were viewed as savages? Money, baby. They wanted the gold. When you begin to see what was going on in the Black Hills of South Dakota, man, you really get an insight into how evil our history is as a country. But see, that's what's fascinating about history, is we gotta know who we are as a people. We have to know who we are as a people, or we're just gonna keep committing the same mistakes over and over again. The same mistakes that have been plaguing history throughout human existence, man. And that's what history gives you, is a way to break the chain of pain. Break the chain of pain. Educate your mind. Parker, Christian, history is not a hoax. If you want to know what's going on in your present moment, begin to figure out what happened all the previous moments that led up to this moment. Anyway, man, keep studying. Don't be stupid. Turn off the televisions. Read a book. Whoa. I want to make a couple notes about the video you just watched. We're talking about how history is subjective. And now I went and watched that video, and I noticed I had a spot where I didn't link ideas together properly. First of all, John Jacob Astor in the early 1800s in westward expansion was all about the fur trade. It wasn't about gold. Gold came later. When they were exploiting the Black Hills from the Indians, that was after the Civil War, basically. And why they were doing that was to pay back the debts they owed on the Civil War. But I was looking at that video and I noticed it blurred and I didn't make that clear. And so if you didn't know your history, you would think that the original westward expansion was about gold, but that wasn't the truth. The original westward expansion that John Jacob Astor was about, and the original French and the original British were about, was about the fur trade, because fur in the early 1800s was the equivalent of the petrodollar now, and it had started a worldwide economy where they would go and they would trade around the world with the furs that they got in the North America. Also, I want to make a note that when I talk about manifest destiny, we forget about Mexico, man. Mexico is a conquered nation, essentially out here, especially in the southwest of America. Again, that happened before the Civil War in the 1800s, and most of the generals in the Civil War were fighting in the Mexican-American War. And I just started to get fascinated about the Mexican-American War because I'm reading a book about Stonewall Jackson. And Stonewall Jackson was a hero in the Mexican-American War, and I didn't really realize how radical the Mexican-American War was until I started to read about Stonewall Jackson. And I also began to learn about the South from the perspective of the Confederate Army and Stonewall Jackson, which expanded my knowledge about the Civil War. And as I'm reading about Stonewall Jackson, I realized the Civil War is sort of a blank spot in my history. It just gets kind of glossed over as, you know, the states fought each other about slavery. Way more going on there. Way more going on there. And it's kind of blowing my mind what really was going on in the Civil War. Because a bunch of people at the beginning of the Civil War were all like, not that fired up about it, man, let me tell you. And there were a bunch who were super fired up about it, but everybody was about killing the Indians, north, south. So, you know, that whole the North was so morally responsible for invading the southern states. Doesn't really stand up when you realize at the same time they were prescribing genocide to the Plains Indians. But, you know, so history is this just ball, and that's not talking about what's going on in China during the 1800s. You see, there was a lot going on in China in the 1800s as well, as there was in Africa. Lots of interesting stuff going on in Africa. You want to read about some crazy stuff, read about what was going on down with the Afrikaners. But were they Afrikaners then? What were the Dutch called? Because the British were down there. Anyway, the war with the Zulus was heavy stuff too, man. And that war with the Zulus comes from a Western perspective as well. So most of all the history we get is very, I mean, I hate to jump in that pool there, but it's very Christian Anglo-oriented. And see, that's what people don't get. Well, I can't prescribe to this other thing is Black history is incredible. Black history is incredible. And that's what needs to be accentuated with this whole thing they got going on now, you know. Do you know who Marcus Garvey was? He's a pretty interesting dude. But do you know what happened in Liberia? Not pretty interesting, because that's the failed African constitutional state. I mean, look, history is the most fascinating story you will ever begin to dig into, because it just goes off in a billion different directions, man. Literally 7 billion at this present moment. So I just want to make that clear, and then I got fired up about history again. And dude, I love history. I can't read books that aren't historical in some sort of context right now. Like, I stopped all that stuff, man. Nah, I'm not doing this, guy. So yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, you got to, classic paraglider wanted me to like pick him up hitchhiking, but his chute wasn't packed. Like, you got to pack that thing up if you're going to be jumping in someone's car, I think. It's just, see, I don't get people, man. Like, you're hitchhiking with a giant paraglider and you haven't packed it all up so that you could fit in someone's car. I'm not picking that dude up. He should start walking. Maybe he should catch a thermal. All right, Christian, Parker, man, I love history. I hope you love history too, man. The illusion is President T-shirt. The illusion is President T-shirt. Now it's time for the cheap commercialism part of my videos. We have the illusion stickers. Look at that, don't buy into the status quo. We have those in large. We have those in small. We have the don't buy into the status quo T-shirt in gray. And what other color we got, Max? And we also have the bowl cut maintenance in gray, blue, black. Do we have it in red? We got it in red. And this is what red looks like. Yeah, man, look at that. And the universe will provide shirt. Yeah, a little homage to Bill Murray via me, huh? Yeah, we like that in red. We got that in gray. I think we got some pink bowl cut maintenance ones coming. Yeah, for the ladies, yeah. And then the red bowl cut maintenance. So look, that's the end of the commercial ad here. The links are down below. Order a T-shirt. Max, come here. This is my partner in crime. He's getting married. So let's buy some T-shirts. Let's keep the wheels rolling here, people. Thanks for your support. Thanks for your love. Send any pictures you got wearing your T-shirt, man. We get super fired up on that. Thank you.